their email differently,
Yeah.
where they will just say spam, for example, or junk mail.
Hmm.
You have to go into that folder and then redirect your email back.
Yeah. I guess she's been getting the other things, but I don't know why it didn't happen today. Is Steve going to join us too, Rian?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, we have to all meet him. Some of
Yeah.
us have been lucky to have been able to meet him in person. Jean did, Mark, myself,
Yeah.
Donna, probably Jeff. Yeah, because Jeff was at the Arbor Day.
Yep. Mhm.
Jeff is in Houston, but he's supposed to join us. So far, the only one I know can't make it is Holly. She's out doing a prescribed burn somewhere. So we still have some time. So
I was saying that the kids at Clark were so cute when you start talking about the tree diaper.
oh, they did.
They were giggling, and I imagine their images of their baby brothers or sisters.
Yeah. Well, that's funny because I thought they would laugh, but nobody laughed out loud. They were sort of doing it to themselves.
They were looking at each other, you know, like, is it safe? What's safe? How do I respond to this? They were cute.
They were very responsive.
Yeah, they seem to know a lot already.
I know.
Yeah, when they said, what do trees give us? And the one girl her hand shot up, oxygen.
I know. I thought that was great.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah. There's Steve. I found these kids know more about science and environment and climate change than most adults.
You think they're way ahead of us?
I think so.
Well, they will be when they're our age, hopefully.
Yes, yes. They'll have solved all these problems, we hope.
Yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. There's Jeff. I thought you'd be holed up in an office somewhere, Jeff.
I know, I'm on site in Houston.
You mean they actually have trees in Houston?
They have beautiful trees all around me.
How hot is it?
That's about maybe mid 80s, high 80s, but humid.
Humid. It's about
Yeah,
probably the same temperature here, but not as humid.
yeah. A little bit of a breeze, which is good.
Yeah. Let's see. We got 6 people. We need one more, right? Yeah. I guess Steve doesn't count as a tree commissioner. I know Mark, the other Mark's coming, but he's going to be on his phone. So, and Donna should be here. She got the email.
Yeah, she got the email, so
Yeah.
get Donna on, I believe, via Corin.
Aha. Here she
Yeah.
comes. Let's see. So we'll start in just a minute. Now we've got 7. Holly's not coming. Mark. There's Jeff Pacholi and Tim. Here comes Mark.
So just a quick note. Brennan Duncan might be joining us to give a brief summary of what's going on Fifth Street.
Okay,
Unfortunately, I did not get him the link until just recently, so I think it's a great one. But maybe we can fit him in at the beginning of this
Okay.
or at the end. So we'll see.
okay. We got two Steve Gaines here.
We have 2 Steve Gaines and 2 Peggies.
Oh, we got two Peggies too? Oh
Yeah,
my goodness.
Peggy. Oh,
No,
they
I
did
fixed
change.
that.
Well, I think we'll go on and get started. Almost everybody's here. Here comes Jeff Pacioli too, so we'll get started. First, let me see if anyone had any comments about the April minutes. This Mark Rylander was nice to do that for us, and Steve is going to continue.
I just had one correction that Crystal Ritterwald's first name is spelled incorrectly, so it's not a big deal.
Okay. Mark, did you hear that? I'll write it down and let him know. You had already
Okay.
told me, I think too. So I'll check on that. And there's Jeff. Jeff, you usually have a hat on, I think, so you look different. I'm not sure who-
Yeah.
I wasn't sure who that was.
I hear just in time. Was out in Richmond all day. It's yeah. I've seen my pants.
Okay. Well, I was about to introduce Steve. There he is there. Steve, now first I've got to ask you, because we call you Steve, and then actually I saw your name, your email is actually Steven with a V-E-N. So from now and ever after, you have to tell us what you want us to call you.
Steve is fine. But seems to be
Steve-
not
Steven?
a work man. Either one works, but I guess Steve could work for a tree commission. Would be great.
Okay. Well, Steve is new to us. I'm going to let you introduce himself, but I just want to say that I've been working with a little bit, and he is so responsive. And yesterday he was at a tree planting at Clark School, and he is a natural born teacher. He had the kids in the palm of his hand. A few of us were there. Sorry, I couldn't invite everyone because schools just have a lot of security concerns and COVID right now. But we had a few people there, Donna and Jean and Mark. But anyway, Steve did a tremendous job. So if he gets tired of doing this, he can always find a teaching job, I'm sure. So we had lots of fun. I'm going to let Steve, you introduce yourself to everybody.
Sure. Glad to be here. I guess I started on April 11th. So a lot has happened, and there's certainly a lot to do. My background is mostly working with woodlot management. I came here from the Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation, where I was mostly working on state-owned preserves.
You're fading out there, Steve.
Oh, sorry. So I came from Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation. Most of my work there was working on larger state-owned preserves. So probably had a couple of thousand acres that I was in charge of managing. This was everything from doing timber sales to prescribed burns to planting, tree installations, and invasive plant control. So a lot of different kinds of plantings, but it was more of an idea of restoration of woodlands, and particularly sensitive woodlands. So a lot of endangered species that I was working with. Before that, I've spent a fair amount of time and bouncing around a good bit lately. I have worked with a utility company, so doing hazard trees in regards to explaining to the public what trees we're removing and why, and that sort of thing. And also working in New England with more of an education type nonprofit where we were educating private landowners and also forest industry professionals, doing continuing education credits, that sort of thing. But a lot of arranging and kind of coordinating public workshops. Some of them I taught, some of them I got other outside specialists to come in and teach. So that's a lot of what I've been doing. So again, more of a larger scale woodlot management as opposed to urban tree interface. But I'm trying to learn quickly. A lot's going on quickly, and everybody's been very helpful. Rion's been great, as well as everybody else at Parks and Rec. As far as education goes, I have an associate's degree from Dabney Lancaster in forest technology, which is, I'd say, what I use 90% of the time. I also got a bachelor's degree from the University of Vermont in forestry and a graduate degree from Virginia Tech, also in forestry. That was most of my dissertation was on invasive plants. So a lot of background with that. And I think certainly in the urban interface, that definitely comes into play. So glad to be here and glad to meet all of you.
Well, thank you. Thank you very, did I interrupt? Is that the end?
Yep, yeah, that's it.
Yeah, we're just gonna
Sorry, my
give-
dog's going crazy.
I was just going to give a quick staff report, and then I will hand over to Brandon to just give the tree commission a quick update of the street. I know there was some interest to see where we are, what we're doing with that. So first and foremost, I'm very excited to bring Stephen on board. It was a great experience for bringing him aboard, and we're working right now hand in hand. I will be stepping back, but not forgotten. Not forgotten at all, because due to lack of staffing in the communications department, each department will now be in charge of their own Zoom accounts and moderating each tree event. So I will still be there, but I will be mostly in the background. And obviously, if there's any issues, concerns, I'll be gladly to give you my input. Just a few things that are occurring. As you can see, leaves are blooming, but with leaves comes eyesore. As you can see, Preston, I believe on the corner of Preston and West Main, I believe we've done some removal of ash trees. So you'll be able to see a lot of ash trees that are popping their heads out, and they are hazardous to the community. So we are working hand in hand with Steve and the contractor Bigo. We're keeping a spreadsheet of every ash tree that we will be removing. So we are really, really busy with that. Good news, as everybody know, that in April, the City Council approved our FY23 budget, which includes our CIP. So at the moment, starting in July 1st, we will have $100,000 for replanting of trees, and then also $105,000 for removal of ash trees only. So we do have that. Stephen, Bigo, and myself, we are coming up with a plan of how we are going to move forward, especially with ash trees, of the removal of those trees. But in hindsight, that's our game plan, is to figure out how do we strategically move and how do we spend the city dollar on the most critical trees that will need to be removed within the city. The other thing that we are working on, and Steve is, she is taking it like a champ. There's a few things coming up. For example, this is the time for Steve to, dive into the tree canopy report, work with the commission on where we're going to do our next tree planting. And also how do we educate the public, especially on right-of-ways. And we do have that. Then also we have to also look at the RFP for the downtown tree study. That's also on the radar that we are also going to be doing. And then the bigger question, which we will talk about this, down the line, about how do we navigate site plans and which site plans are crucial to bring to the commission. I think that will just be a like a work session probably, where we can sit down and discuss how do we navigate that. And the big news, or the sad news, is that, as you saw in Garrett, if you drove past Garrett, Steve and myself, we done the best that we could do in order to save the last tree. But unfortunately, they were just too close. The setback was just too close to save that last one. So unfortunately, that tree will be coming down. So that being said, any questions? If you have no questions, we can give it to Brandon, and we'd like to thank Brandon for coming on his time off in the evening to present to you, just to give you a quick update.
Rian, just to, I want to assure everybody, you probably know, Rian did not mean that the last tree on Friendship Court is
Yeah,
coming down.
the
He meant-
fourth tree.
Yeah, there were 4 trees in jeopardy in the first phase. And Steve emailed me last week or this week saying the last tree had just been so compromised with damage to the roots and damage to the canopy when they had to work underneath it, that he thought it was dangerous and had to come down. We always knew that probably was going to happen. And I think we've assured Steve and Rian and James Frias that we want to be involved in the next phases and try to save as many trees as we can. But I just wanted to make sure everybody thinks that the last tree at Friendship Court is not coming down. So thank you, Rian, and thank you, Steve. So if we don't, so what I had before the Fifth Street, we got the update from Brennan. I had emailed Steve and Rian. Normally the Tree Commission has a representative on these tree smart scale projects, these tree road projects, and still trying to find out if some of the old ones are still going on. But certainly Fifth Street is something we want to be involved in. It has mature trees in the median and on the edges in many places. So I think Steve asked him to come and just give us a brief update. And if we run over, Rian, we may wait to do the Microsoft Teams instruction till later. So since we've got Brennan here, let's go on and just get an update on the Fifth Street.
May I ask a question? I'd like to be sure that the consultants for Seville Plans did get the canopy report, tree report. I don't know whose responsibility it was to make sure they have that, but do we know that it has been given to them?
Jody, I did send them the recommendations for the zoning from the codes, from basically our whole commission. The codes commission had developed them, committee. And James said he got it and he was passing it on, but I did not send him the canopy study, but I'll do that.
Okay, I think they should have it. Just cover our bases.
Sure, I'll do that. Thank you.
Thank
for
you,
reminding
Peggy.
me. Okay.
Thank you.
All right, Brendan, I think you're up.
All right, I'll do my best. I'm driving to pick up kids after school activities. So thank you for having me, and really just wanted to touch base with you all on the Fifth Street project. It's kind of been a very quick whirlwind. We're trying to do a little bit different process than we've done on the other smart scale projects. So a lot of those, when we've gotten the tree commission involved, it's kind of after we've already been awarded the project. And this time around, we're trying to engage the public, a little bit on the front end so that we can make sure that the application that we're making, at least has a little bit of public input on it, trying to learn from some of our mistakes. So when we actually, or if we get funding for it and we set up a steering committee, we probably will again have someone from the tree commission on that, but we're just not quite there yet. So we did have a public meeting last week just to kind of talk through some of the options for the corridor. And then we have a meeting with City Council. I believe it's May 23rd, 24th, something like that. Whatever that Monday is, it'll be a joint work session between Planning Commission and City Council to kind of talk through what the options are moving forward. If you weren't able to attend, all of the meeting material for that is up on the website. It's fifthstreetsafety.com, I believe. But the highlights of that, essentially, we're proposing two and a half options, kind of. So one option would be essentially what was proposed back in 2018 when we did the Fifth Street corridor study of doing bicycle pedestrian improvements, doing some safety R-cuts for the vehicles, but really not changing the corridor itself too much. After the recent fatalities that we've had on the corridor over the last 5 years, 4 to 5 years, we felt like we needed to go back to the public and be like, hey, is this really still what people want to do? So the other option, we'll call it number 2, would be a road diet. So with that option, we would take away one of the travel lanes and essentially just make it a transit only lane. And in the presentation, we had it as a joint transit bike lane, but we're hearing a lot from the bike community that they want that separate. So when we go to City Council, we'll show that as a separate lane. But essentially, there would just be one lane for traffic, one lane that would be transit only, and then there would still be the bicycle pedestrian improvements. And then the third option, or something that could get added on to either of those, would be a roundabout that would get placed at the intersection of 5th Street and Bailey. So that would either be a 2-lane roundabout if we didn't do the road diet, or it would be a single lane roundabout if we do go with the road diet. So those are the 3 main ones. I guess concerning the tree commission, one of the things that we were concerned about on the corridor that had come up and we had as an alternative there, almost every single one of the fatal crashes has involved the trees on the corridor. And with the speeds that are there, we want to try and protect the public from, themselves and from hitting those trees. So there's we could try and do a guardrail along the median. That was one of the options that was there. We don't really want to go through and remove all the trees, but at the same time, something has to be done. So I'd like to hear your guys' input on, how we can try and minimize the tree and vehicle conflict points. I guess as far as the options themselves go, the only real impact would be with the roundabout itself at Bailey. Those roundabouts would be large enough that there would be some of those trees right at that current intersection that would have to get removed. As far as next steps, like I said, we're going to City Council at the end of this month to kind of get an idea of which direction they want us to go forward with the design. We'll go back to them in June with kind of that preferred concept a little bit more fleshed out, and with cost estimates and everything to get their resolution of support for us to apply for the smart scale funding in like July, August.
Brendan, are you with public traffic, or just curious who you represent?
Sorry. Yes, I'm the traffic engineer with the city of Charlottesville.
Okay. Does anybody have any questions? Oh, Tim.
Yeah, thanks, Peggy, and thank you, Brendan, for that report. I appreciate you sharing that in the midst of a moment of transition in your day. I just want to encourage the philosophy that trees aren't dangerous and trees don't cause crashes. It's the misuse of motor vehicles that are the root of the problem with any sort of tree vehicle collision. So I just want to request that like the concept of removing trees as a vehicular threat is eliminated from the concept of option 1, 2, or 2.5. I think if trees have to come down for infrastructure development, that makes sense. But to say that trees in the median are dangerous to drivers at a time when our city is in a crisis with our urban forest is very upsetting to hear. So that's my request.
I agree. And no, the reason that just to give a little bit of background, I guess, within an urban context, we use a horizontal offset from curb lines, whereas a more like suburban, rural, they do a clear zone. And the clear zone is really more targeted towards higher speed type scenarios, which is why the city has not gone with that route. So like, that's why we can put power poles like not that far off the road, that kind of stuff. But because of the speeds that are being achieved on the corridor, that's where, again, I don't want to remove the trees, but the facts are the facts that almost every single one of them, even the one accident that didn't involve breaking the speed limit, they were still going 45 miles an hour. And when you hit a 24-inch oak tree going 45 miles an hour, it can be fatal. So that's what I'm saying. I'm open to whatever suggestions we have. The only really option that we came up with was installing that guardrail. I don't know what else to do as an interim condition. We're trying to make the corridor as safe and as beautiful as we can. And so that's where, we didn't want to, I didn't want to go to council and say, we're telling people we're going to remove trees, and no, we haven't come and at least discussed this with the tree commission. Even though we know that you guys obviously would not want us to remove any of the trees, but also, if the only alternative is to install a guardrail, we'd like your support on that option to say, hey, we do need to do something to address the safety. And, it may require city council giving some funds towards that.
Thank you, Brennan. Anybody else have a question? Brennan, I'm sorry, Jeff, did you? Jeff,
Yeah, I was just going to say, I would be in full support of guardrails, and guardrails don't have to be just like a bent steel section. They can be cable, they can be wood, but that is an alternative versus taking out the trees, as Tim so clearly stated, I think is really important. Like, we don't want to take out the trees. There are other options.
Yeah. Anybody else have a comment? Brennan, I just wanted to ask you a couple questions. They're not only trees in the middle, but they're trees on the side. Do your designs impact those?
They shouldn't too much. I know the concepts do widen the right of way by about 5 feet on either side. So there may be, a few trees that are, if they're like right on the back of the sidewalk, that may have to be impacted. But for the majority, I think the trees are back like 20 or 30 feet on the sides.
What is the speed limit you're going to propose for Fifth Street?
So right now the speed limit is 40 miles an hour. We would like to get that down, but some of that will be dictated on exactly what the design elements that we're able to put in are. If we are able to put in the roundabout, like, we could probably lower that another 5 miles an hour. If we don't do the roundabout options at all, it'll probably be a little bit harder to reduce the speed limit more than what we just did.
In your
Brennan?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, Brennan, do you also need to have guardrails at those speeds to protect pedestrians? What does that look like?
Well, the pedestrians are on the exterior. And really what it comes down to is a pedestrian can get out of the way and they're not always there. Whereas a fixed object is what we're trying to protect from for the guardrails.
Brennan, in your opinion, I mean, lowering the speed on any road probably makes it safer, doesn't it?
I mean, yes, the slower that vehicles travel make it safer. Lowering the speed limit itself does not necessarily make it safer. Just because if you look, I mean, take 250 for instance, the speed limit on 250 is 35 miles an hour, and you'd be hard pressed to find a vehicle actually going 35 miles an hour on 250.
Yeah. Well, I'm just probing a little bit because wondering if this lowering the speed limit wouldn't help from protecting not only pedestrians on the side, but the trees. I mean, we do have medians on Preston Avenue. We have trees in the median on Preston. We have trees on, is it Monticello Road going out to Monticello? In fact, we have 2 sets of trees. And they're not as mature, of course, as the ones on Fifth Street. I mean,
Right.
I think you're hearing pretty loud and clear that the tree commission would like to protect those trees.
No, this is not news to me. I fully expected that answer when we came to you. So I know that we don't want to lose the trees, and Preston is a little bit different. Like the reason that Fifth Street is such a problem, and the reason we're trying to go after this funding is because it's a mile-long stretch of pretty straight roadway. With downhill sections coming from either, it's a valley. It's downhill from Harris Street and it's downhill from Cherry. And some of the speeds that are being obtained, in these vehicle accidents are over 100 miles an hour. So we, just lowering the speed, like the accidents that are happening are not the everyday driver, running into the trees. These, for the most part, have been, very excessive speeds that we're trying to, address.
All right, well, I know you're going to pick your children up if nobody else. I did, when you started saying something about the tree commission probably would be involved, if I can see this very gently, we definitely would like to be involved. In fact, we may make a statement on when you come in front of the planning commission and city council, because we are concerned. I mean, as you know, the canopy of the city is going down. Having a beautiful road, I think, can also slow speeds. But anyway, just to let you know that we are going to be following this project, but I don't want to put you on notice or anything, and appreciate you coming and when you're picking up your children. We will.
Yeah,
be
I mean,
Okay.
the only reason I said probably was because if we apply for this funding this year, it's going to be 6, 7, 8 years from now. I don't know what that process looks like at that point in time. So, I fully expect there to be a public process like we've done with the other projects. But again, I just don't know what that'll
Yeah.
look like.
Okay.
And Brendan, this is Jody. I mean, can it be said that the trees are keeping speeding vehicles from going across the median, hitting somebody else head on?
Good point.
Yeah, I mean, that is a possibility, but at the time of the night that most of those are happening, there's very little traffic on the street. And so it's, there's a chance that a vehicle could be coming the other way, and there is 100% chance that there's a tree that doesn't move. That's really what it comes down to, that, there's a 10% chance maybe that they would hit a vehicle coming the other way if they crossed the median and got going on the other side. Again, it's that clear zone that we're trying to, again, we're going after VDOT safety funding, or VDOT funding, and safety is a large portion of the score. So we're trying to, get this project to score as high as we can so that we can address the safety issue that is, what we're trying to address.
Well, Brendan, if nobody else has a question, 29, I'll just say 29 North, of course, has trees in the median too, but we'll probably give you a lot of examples. But if you're,
yes, some
it-
of it is, it's not necessarily that there are trees, it's the size of the trees. And I know the tree commission, again, I know you guys are in favor of the large mature trees, but you're not going to see on 29 North that are, less than 5 feet from the curb or the edge of pavement, that large of a tree on 29 North. They're not there. VDOT won't allow it.
well, they're not there yet, but they are going to mature because we helped pick out some of them. That's all right.
Okay.
All right, just Vicky real quickly, and then we're going to move on.
I just want to say that this is the first time that I have ever heard anybody describe a tree as a traffic hazard. And I'm shocked, and I just hope that everything is done to prevent any of the trees coming down.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, Brendan, you go get your children, and thank you for coming. You'll hear from us again, I'm sure.
All right. I
Okay.
appreciate it. Thanks.
All right. So Rian, we're going to skip the Microsoft Teams description because we don't want to keep Susan Elliott any longer. So Susan, we appreciate you coming. Susan Elliott is with Public Works in the Sustainability Department. And Susan, you may have another term for your department now, so I may be incorrect, but you can correct me. But she's going to give us a summary of the Heat Watch report that they did this summer. So Susan.
Great, thank you so much. Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Yes.
Yes.
Excellent, great. So my name is Susan Elliott. I am the Climate Protection Program Manager for the City of Charlottesville, and that is located within the Environmental Sustainability Division, which is one of the divisions within the city's Department of Public Works. I've got a little bit of a PowerPoint that I put together that I'll go ahead and walk through. I think the first part of this you guys probably already are familiar with, but just in case there's other people, watching or who are interested. One of the first part I'll talk through is about our projected climate hazards for Charlottesville. There are 3 of those. We are currently in the midst of doing a climate vulnerability assessment, and that is the second step working towards developing a climate adaptation plan for the city. Out of the first step of that process was to identify what our projected climate hazards are. Extreme heat is one of the top 3 that's projected for our area. So I'll talk a little bit about what that means, a little bit about the urban heat islands effects, and then the Heat Watch campaign and what we saw come out of that. So make sure I got my clicker in the right place. There we go. So in terms of extreme heat, when we look at the climate projection models, what we're really looking at is over the next 30 years that we're going to start seeing a greater number of heat waves that we're going to be experiencing of extreme heat, and that they will be lasting for a longer period of time. So when we look back at 2020, there were 35 consecutive days that were above 90 degrees. When we look ahead at 80 years from now, projections are saying that when we're dealing with extreme heat, it's going to be similar to what Southern Texas is experiencing now in terms of what that sort of daily experience and the strength and extremeness of what the heat is. They're looking at that we'll be seeing about twice the number of heat waves for slightly longer periods of time. What that also ends up potentially from within the models looking like is that we end up with really long periods of a single heat wave because there's only so many days in summer. And so when those different heat waves, individual heat waves start getting longer, they start to kind of overlap potentially. And so when we're thinking about what we're doing in terms of climate adaptation, how we move around the city, different, just what daily life is like for folks, all of that starts to come into play in terms of where they can get respite or not from extreme heat. We also know that the extreme heat will not be experienced uniformly across the region. These are just 4 pieces I put here on the screen of where and how those can differ based on people's individual lives. Some of it goes down to physiology. Some of it is spatially, where are you located? Part of it goes into what your social and daily life patterns are. And some of it is also your demographics. So we know that young children and people who are older and elderly can't handle heat as well. Their bodies just don't react as well with it. In terms of spatially, this is really where the part of urban heat islands start to come into effect. It's primarily, this is where you're seeing your suburban and urban design in terms of how we've built out our landscape. And that goes back to what are the materials that are being used. So when the materials that can absorb the heat from the sun on them, that then retain that, and then slowly let it off over time at nighttime, when in theory it's cooler at night, that heating and cooling effect happens every day. When we're then looking at these extreme periods and these prolonged periods of extreme heat, what that starts to mean is that we're not getting that evening release as much. And then we're not getting, especially when you're in the more urban areas where it's the materials that hold and retain that heat longer, the next day and the next day and the next day are just continuing to compound that and make it stretch out over time. So the graph on the right is from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and it sure shows you what those surface temperatures are for that. At the end, I'll be putting some links into the chat because we do have this and some other information on our website. So you can go and click through to those if you want to get further information. In terms of talking about the social and daily life patterns in heat islands, this is where, as we go about our daily lives, things differ across our population. So people who are most vulnerable, if your job relies on you being outdoors for what your work is, those experiences of extreme heat, you don't have that opportunity to get inside and stay in the air conditioning, for example. Depending what your home situation is, not all of our homes in Charlottesville have central air conditioning. So that's one of the pieces of it. Even if you do have air conditioning in your home, that idea of how well insulated and air sealed is it? How much is it baking in the sun versus is that structure shaded affects then what's happening in terms of how much your air conditioning has to run, how efficiently it's working in terms of being able to maintain climate comfort within your building and within your home. And it also starts to speak over to what's happening with your utility bills. So when we look at houses that have a lot of deferred maintenance on them, usually because there's been lack of investment in them over time, the equipment in them tends to not be as efficient or as effective in terms of how its cooling ability for the home. And if you're seeing properties where you're seeing that deferred maintenance, there's not uncommon that there's a cash flow issue. And so they're trying to keep that piece of air cooling equipment stretched out as long as it can to avoid that big upfront cost of having to do a full replacement on it. So you're then, when we start introducing these longer and more extreme heat waves, what we're also seeing is that equipment needs to work longer and harder. It means that those same households that are already limited in terms of their cash flow are then having to put more and more money towards their utility bills. And so you start to see this cyclical effect that goes beyond just physical effects, but it's starting to affect the financial wherewithal of our different households in our city too. Additionally, how we travel around town goes into effect with this. So if you're able to, walk 10 steps outside your door, get in your air-conditioned car, go drive to someplace else, and then go into an air-conditioned building, how you're going to be experiencing extreme heat is going to be quite different than if you are someone who chooses or has to walk, bike, or use transit to get around town. One of the other things coming out of the climate protection program, where we're looking at how can we, as a community, start reducing our greenhouse gas emissions, is about a third of the emissions within the city come from automobile use and the fuels that we're using for those. So one of the strategies in terms of reducing that, as well as just overall congestion, and as our population grows and there's more demand for access to get around our city, is looking at how can we shift more of that transportation access into transit or into walking or into bicycling. When you start looking at switching to those modes and the combination of things like extreme heat, you're then increasing that exposure for people. And so what does that mean in terms of how are we designing our urban infrastructure systems to enable that transportation access? But what are these other compounding sort of climate weather effects that are then going to be affecting people, and are those putting different barriers in place? There's also things like disruptive events that happen when we get power outages. And I think we've all experienced that around the city, that we know if not, every property within the city of Charlottesville boundaries suddenly goes black at the same time. There are certain neighborhoods that are more prone to having power outages than others, certain parts of the grid that go out while other people in the next neighborhood over are just fine. And so there's also that in terms of like social daily life patterns, spatially where people are located, there are these variations on when and are we even able to predict, which we may not be able to, on when there is going to suddenly be some sort of a disruptive event that's going to make that experience of extreme heat much more danger prone for parts of our community. When we are looking across our community, often the places that we're seeing this are in our redlined and underinvested areas of the city. Those are the areas where you have more asphalt, where there isn't space necessarily to put in street trees. It's areas that that you just have what I was describing before. If you have more of that concrete, more of those materials that are absorbing the heat and then retaining it overnight. Similarly, when we start looking over at our suburban design, we've got our big parking lots, different streetscape areas, our big box stores. All of those are materials that then hold and retain that heat. So what we did in terms of our heat island data collection effort, this was a data collection campaign that was completed in August of 2021. It is actually a campaign that is branded as Heat Watch, and it is run through the National Integrated Heat Health Information System federal agency, which NOAA is one of the subsets of within that agency overall. They work with a consultant group called Kappa Strategies that then coordinates with cities across the country annually. Different cities are in each year to support local community organizers in getting volunteers to then go around the city on a single day, 3 different times, to collect local data. What we've had, not doing it this way, what we have is satellite data. So we can't get quite as granular from the satellite data because the area of land that they calculate based on is just so much bigger. So going through Heat Watch, it allows us to get a little bit more granular, to actually see where we are in different parts of our community. You guys may have seen a couple of years back, there was a New York Times article that talked about Richmond as one of the areas where it was showing that connection between high heat and redlining. The data collection campaign that Richmond did is the same Heat Watch one. So that's the same campaign that we were now a part of as well. And so for it, we put out a call for volunteers. As you guys know, Charlottesville has a very enthusiastic population that likes to contribute in. And in about the space of 2 or 3 days, we had over 100 people raise their hands and say they would like to be able to help if their schedules worked out. In terms of picking the day for our campaign, we did not need 100 people. We had 7 different routes that needed to be gone over 3 different times at specific times during that single one day. What we were trying to coordinate, though, was seeing what those overlapping schedules were for all the volunteers. People who were able to then complete a pre-training in terms of how to use the equipment, what was expected for them on that data collection day, and also tracking the weather, because we needed to find a day that was high heat and low precipitation. And preferably that would be in the middle of a streak of those, so that it's the sort of moisture in the air wouldn't be affected by a rainstorm the previous day. So with that moving target, we did end up finding a date in August. And what that map on the right shows you is the compiled map of 5 different driving routes and 2 different bicycle routes that went around town. The equipment for this is there's a picture on the left there. That is what the data collection equipment looks like that attaches onto a bicycle. If it was connected to a vehicle, it was that same sort of circular tube, but then there was a post that was about 1.5 feet tall, that the bottom of it would go into your car window, and then you close your car window on it, and so it would be sticking up above the car as people would be driving around. A couple of things with the data, the way the equipment was if you were going too slow, it would stop collecting data points because it needed to get a certain sort of distance in between each individual data point. When Kappa Strategies then took the data and analyzed it for us, they did some modeling where also if 2 of our routes were really close to each other, in order to not skew the overall data modeling, they would select one of those 2 points that they would remove so that it wasn't kind of overweighting the way that the model dispersion was. Additionally, we had a volunteer who went around with FLIR cameras. FLIR is the brand name for that. And with FLIR cameras, that's where these 2 images on the right were generated out of. And so in terms of your temperature scale, that circular little target sign in the middle, that tells you where that's aimed at, what that surface temperature was. So the middle image, the left of the two thermal images on the screen, that is the intersection. If you're on West Main Street, you're looking at the intersection with 4th Street, and right across the way is where like Feast and Orzo and Albemarle Baking Company and all that are located. And so what you're seeing right there is pointing at the crosswalk. It's at 110 degrees. If you look at the right-hand image, I'm not sure exactly where this is in the city, but again, it's, you know, at an intersection sort of crosswalk location, it's 112 degrees. So when we're thinking about that impact of extreme heat, where exactly it is that you are then moving through the city affects strongly what that temperature is that you are feeling and your body is experiencing with it. In terms of the data that we got back from Kappa Strategies, there were 2 types of it. One is this that I'm showing on the screen, which is the traverse data. The traverse data, these are the routes that were driven or biked. And this is the then temperature gauge of what that was in terms of those little data points that were taken. So it was the same routes 3 times in one single day. So in the morning for between 6 and 7 a.m., in the afternoon between 3 to 4 p.m., and in the evening from 7 to 8 p.m. Each route did take about 45 minutes to an hour to complete. And they did the same direction going through the route each time. One thing to note on this is the temperature scales. The maximum temperature is not the same from each individual map that I'm showing you. So for example, the maximum temperature, so that red part in the morning is at 74, basically 75 degrees. In the middle image, the highest temperature is 65.5 degrees, or sorry, 96.5 degrees. And then on the right, it's back down to 91 degrees. What you can see is then within each of these images, it shows you where the hottest part of the city was at that time of the day. When you start looking at them across and comparing, what you can see are areas, for example, in the morning, let me start with the afternoon. The areas that are red in the afternoon, if you look back at those same areas in the morning, if they're not red, that means that those areas between 7 a.m. and 3 to 4 p.m. absorbed heat at a greater rate than the other areas around it. So you can see by comparing the images together which areas are absorbing heat, and then when you're looking over towards the evening or comparing evening to morning, which ones are retaining that heat longer and holding on to it. The second type of data that they did when they then took this traverse data, they then modeled it and they turned it into these land area models. So these are raster images. And you can see where the cooler spots are. Those are definitely the areas where we do have more trees along different creek waterways, things like that around town. And again, the color scales are not, they differ between each map. So just because red on one map does not equal the same temperature point of red on the second map that you're looking at here. And so with this, it also speaks a little bit to what are the surrounding land use types for these different areas beyond just what we got on the actual roadways with the traverse data. But you can see which areas of the city heat up faster, which ones then hold on to that heat longer, and which areas retain a decently, cooler temperature relative to everything else. Again, here, these are some more images from the FLIR cameras taken between 3 to 4 p.m. There's a little bit more texture difference in terms of what you're seeing. So the one on the left, I believe that is West Main Street. And so you can see the effect of what that difference is when you're on the sidewalk and you're under that tree canopy cover. Whereas if you're looking at several of the other ones, there are a couple of trees you can see kind of off to the side in that second to the left one, but you can also see the sidewalk pavement's pretty warm with that. When you're looking over at the basketball courts that were at Friendship Court, the pavement there obviously is very warm. The second one from the right is one of our playground areas. So it's not an asphalt turf there, but you can still see like there's a decent amount of heat radiating. And then obviously on the far right, we're looking at a shopping center parking lot. Across these 5 images, the volunteer who took these did go ahead and adjust the color scale so that it is the same maximum and minimum temperature when you're looking across these. And then the next piece is really, the next couple of slides are starting to speak towards, well, we have this, we're going to have greater amounts of extreme heat coming into Charlottesville with climate change. What are sort of remedies or ways that we can go about looking at this? And this is kind of starting to begin the idea of how do we start approach climate adaptation planning. Those three types kind of get grouped into the idea of you have your preventions, you've got your acute response in the moment, and then what are your long-term response and adaptation strategies. So prevention, you're looking at changing your urban form, creating spots for respite as people are moving around within the city, looking at overall reducing greenhouse gas emissions so that the effects that we end up with extreme heat are lower. So vegetative buffers, large swaths of impervious, reducing the large swaths of impervious pavement and concrete, getting more places with shade, trees, those types of activities. And I've put blanks for all of these to leave it open-ended, that these are not all-inclusive lists, but it is to generate conversation and idea as we're looking for with climate planning. In terms of acute response, this is like when you're in that moment, what do we do? What are we doing? How are we communicating with our community members so that they can better protect themselves? If we're looking at cooling centers, are they effective? Can people access them? Are they in the right locations? How do people get from where they are to a cooling center if they need to get there? All of those sort of acute response management pieces. And then in terms of long response, when we're looking over at the topic of flooding, relocation comes into question. I'm not sure that's really a great parallel over into the idea of extreme heat. But looking at, are there ways that we can, when we're investing in reducing greenhouse gas emissions with building retrofits, are those same retrofits, how far can we extend them so that they can also create places for people to shelter in space longer and then be able to withstand that extreme heat experience? So with that, I'm going to drop these three links into the chat for you all. The first one is just our webpage with Urban Heat Island information. The second is specifically about our Heat Watch campaign, and it has a link on there where you can download the data that we got back from Kappa Strategies. It is GIS-based data, but you can go ahead and download that if you'd like. And then we have the PDF report where it has the different maps and everything that I showed you today. It also provides more technical details about how they did the data modeling. And then I'll also drop a link in with our climate action planning. We have two different surveys running right now. One is to inform our greenhouse gas emission reduction action plan. The other is to inform our climate vulnerability assessment. And there will be community workshops during June. And so that survey is going to help feed into those workshops. With that, I'll put those in the chat, and that's the end of the pieces that I have to share.
Thank you, Susan. Does anybody have any questions? I can't see everyone, so you might have to just speak up. So if no one speaks up.
Thank you, this is Donna. I have one question. I found it, I had to spend a lot of time with Google Maps last night trying to figure out which roads were highlighted on the maps that came with the document that you shared yesterday. So is there any chance we can get like better labels or better, because there's some spots that seemed really cool that I was surprised about and others that seemed hotter than I would have expected, but I was a little disoriented, I have to say.
So when you say that, like in terms of the digital maps that are in that PDF report?
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I don't think we can. Those were generated by Kappa Strategies for use in the report there. We do have the GIS data though, and so I know there's been some interest. The Bicycle and Pedestrian Advisory Committee was interested in it. And I've heard some other folks around town who are interested in seeing if we might be able to find like some citizen scientists or some of the citizen data groups who have access to GIS and then could do some of that mapping and analysis to help bring some of those pieces together. In talking with some of the folks from over in Richmond who were part of their mapping campaign, really then when if we can get access to some of those resources where people can do some of that data analysis, and what they were discovering was when you bring it into GIS, you can start asking some more of those questions of saying, well, what's that differential between, you know, night and morning? You know, how much, what really, how are certain parts holding on to heat or releasing heat? Where are those? And so if we can access some of those, currently within our like city climate program, we don't have resources to do that. But I do know there are a number of citizen groups that are civically minded groups that are connected with data that in our city that could perhaps, I haven't spoken to them yet, but it seems to align with their mission to be able to help with pieces like that.
Great. And I guess another question is, has this gone to city council yet?
I did not do a presentation. I'm trying to remember if there was an announcement or a memo or something like that, but there was not a formal presentation as part of their agenda, no. Yeah.
Susan, do you mind closing your screen down just so I can see everybody?
Yes, sorry about that.
That's okay.
There we go.
That's okay. Does anybody else have a question? Mark?
In some of the work that we've done with the tree canopy, we've been able to overlay the neighborhood lines so that we can see where the different temperatures and the tree cover is in the city. Is it possible for the neighborhood lines to be overlaid on some of the maps that you're showing to us?
So that goes back again, that it would be an additional ask over to Kappa Strategies. And so since what they put together is part of the bigger Heat Watch campaign that they do with all the different communities, we would have to ask for that to be done specially as an extra overlay.
Is it possible for our city GIS folks to work on that? Seems like putting an overlay on top of your maps would be pretty easy. Isn't there somebody in the city that does that work?
So I don't believe, so what we got in terms of the maps are the things that are in the PDF format. And then we got the raw data in the GIS format. So for folks within our city GIS or anyone in our community, they would have to be rebuilding the maps. Like we do have the raster layer because that's just an image. So that perhaps could be something that would be easier than having to rebuild the whole map.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you, Mark. Did the other Mark, Mark Rylander, did you have a question? Oh, okay. Anybody else? Oh, Jean?
Yeah, I'd like to just also put in a plug for getting this data in a different format, because when we went to send out a flyer to the Ridge Street neighborhood about would you like free trees to plant, we put in an image of the neighborhood, and I had printed it out, and then I had to write the names of the streets in so that people could see the different colors in relation to certain streets. And that was effective, but it would be so much more effective to have a really good image where people can see what their precise street is like, or the streets they travel to and from work or other places, as a advocacy tool. So that's what I would like to see, to have that available.
And is it, sorry, this is just as a follow-up question. Did you feel like the main kind of arterial roads are the ones that are most necessary, or did you really feel like people needed like all of the roads within their neighborhood to be able to, I'm just trying to think like scale of how big the map would have to be, or what would we be going after?
I don't know technically about any of that, but I do know that what people are mainly concerned about is their street and the streets they travel on a regular basis. They're not just concerned with major roads at all. And as a matter of fact, this project was just for getting people to put in trees on their own properties, private properties, not in right of way. So that's what we were interested in talking to them about and having an image for.
Got it. Okay. And Jean actually was one of our volunteers also, in helping with our data stuff. So she had kind of a front row seat to the process.
Thank you, Susan. Maybe you already know, but the Tree Commission initiated a fund called Relief, RELEAF, Seville. And part of the reason is because we've become aware of heat islands and the link between trees and nature and health, just as you talked about. And so we're trying to raise funds to plant trees on private property, preserve trees, and educate families about the consequences of climate change and heat and the loss of trees. So I'll send that to you and Crystal. Because it's really be good if we knew what each other were doing and how we could help each other. In fact, we talked with your director about having someone from your department sometime come to our meetings. And so that was something we were going to discuss. I think Crystal is coming soon too. But we appreciate, if we can have some coordination and back and forth, that'd be great, because we're working on the same issues. So.
Yeah, please send over the program information. It'd be useful to see it. Currently with our climate adaptation planning piece, we need to finish the vulnerability assessment part. And that was expected by the end of summer. And then adaptation planning would be starting with this coming year. So what you guys have going on with the relief program may be one part that becomes worked into those adaptation strategies, or at least a template example that either can be built upon, or if you guys are far enough along your program at that point that you're able to identify barriers or where it's not the right fit in some areas, then that identifies areas that we need to come up with other strategies for.
Thank you. All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Susan.
Thank you. Have a good night, y'all.
Thank you. Yes. Thank you very much. All right. So, Makesha wasn't able to join us because this is her last day of school. Thank goodness. And she'll have more time after this. She can do all our work for us because she'll have a summer free, right, Makesha? So we're going to have some committee reports. Is Steve? Yeah, Steve's still here. I sent Steve a list of issues the Tree Commission is interested in. I'm sure he probably rolled over. But I want you to know, Steve, I've reduced that sheet to, it was only one page, but now it's down to about 2/3. So we're getting there. But anyway, I talked to the committee chairs and thought that maybe within the next month, you, me, and the committee chairs, we do have issues about too many people meeting together, but could get together and sort of go over each other's list and see what's really we can get done and what's a priority. Because obviously, I know you and Rian continue to have low staff and you're doing too many jobs at once. So we don't want to put too much on your shoulders, but I think we could come up with the priorities, some of the things that Rian talked in the beginning. So anyway, with that, I thought we'll have the Education Advocacy Committee. Mark might want to say a few words, and I'm going to talk about some of the activities we've done recently. This is Mark Rylander.
Yeah. So, hi. Here I am. I can only see 9 of us on on an iPad now. I wasn't able to join with video the first part. So one of the things on my list is to sort of summarize a few of the items on the website that need to be updated. And so, Steve, I'll put together an email for you that and review what's on the web now to get the correct names of our current tree commissioners. And we had revised our bylaws, so we want to coordinate those to make sure they're current and link the report we made to council, some things like that, and the canopy study. So so there was that. And this past month, the relief efforts on Arbor Day were really the most educational thing happening, and I wasn't directly as involved as Peggy was. So you might speak to that, and we've talked about potentially looking at some future guests to the Tree Commission that we're working on, and Peggy sent me a note to talk to Jeff about Tim Beatley. So that's really about all I have to report. I did want to offer, since we were just, Peggy, you were talking about your list to Steve, is that one, it might be interesting to hear back from Steve Parks and Rec on our annual sort of, we have a calendar and we have certain things that happen at certain times of year. And it would be great if we knew that worked well for you, those same things, or if there's other timing that makes sense. But I found, now in my, I guess, 5th year in the Tree Commission, that knowing sort of what our major milestones are throughout the year really helps helps to kind of plan and anticipate. Each month's a little different. Our focus kind of shifts. So I'm assuming that we've shared that calendar, but it's a nice tool.
Yeah, Mark, that's one thing I put on Steve's list, but I thought we probably have to have some conversations with the committee chairs and see what the priorities are and see if, Steve can get those things done that are on the list, or we have to move them around or not. So that's sort of moved to the top of the list because Steve's already done some of the things that are on the list, like the recent activities and everything. So that's something, you're right, we need to look at. So thanks. Did you have anything else? Okay. Can I share my screen? Is it Remy, you there?
Yes. Yeah, you can share your screen.
Okay. Well, okay. All right. Okay. What happened now? Can you see? Let's see. Can you see the screen? Can everybody see the sign for the Environmental Career Fair?
Yep. Yes.
Okay. Well, I'm just going to talk about a few activities that Relief and the Tree Commission and have done. So the first one, we had an Environmental Career Fair at Charlottesville High School on April 21st, the day before Arbor Day. I'm sorry I couldn't invite all of you. The security measures are tight and complicated, and the whole COVID issue too. I laughed because we told the vendors, we sent them instructions about 3 times, but still they were worse than children. Many of them didn't follow the protocol. So we had to have somebody in the front of the high school to direct them. So that just proves to me that adults don't pay any more attention than children do. But anyway, it was a great event. We had over 250 kids there, and this was just the beginning. This was held on the back lawn of CHS, where the urban gardens are. So you can see all the straw covered beds there. We had about 28 vendors from, we had nursery contractors, arborists, landscape architects. Jeff's firm was represented there. We had Paul Josie, one of our past chairmen. We had solar energy firms. We had city and state agencies. The city parks were there. Breanne will have to tell me if they got any employees for the summer. We had UVA Sawmill. If you can see, that's over here on the left of the screen. They showed us how they chopped up a big oak that had to been taken down from this very site. We had Dabney Lancaster. We had some commercial establishments. We had nonprofits. The Tree Commission was there, Relief, Cats. Well, we were there, the Tree Commission. We didn't have a table, but we had the Nature Conservancy. We had 3 Cs. And so I can't tell you everybody, but it was a great event. The kids had so much fun. We had popcorn. You can see all the kids outside the popcorn tent. We couldn't make it fast enough. So as you can see, we have many tables, as we said, from vendors, and I think that's Paul Josie there at maybe at one of the tables. We had fun. Tree Commission, the Tree Vineyards Tree Company actually had kids in saddles and balancing on boards from ropes. And this is the, I won't maybe say it right, Steve, but this is the ball gun that shoots a string up into the tree that will eventually pull the ropes up. And kids, of course, you can imagine, had fun doing that. They were trying to hit a target. If they got a target, then they got us a prize. And then just yesterday, we planted a tree. This was the Tree Commission and Relief. We planted a tree on Clark Playground next to the asphalt, which eventually will shade the asphalt. It was a willow oak, and some of you came to that. Again, I didn't invite everybody again, just because the protocols on the schools are very tight right now. So, and there you can see Steve. He had the children very much engaged, asking questions. As I told everybody from the beginning, he's a natural born teacher. The kids were, Jean and Donna can tell you, and Mark were very engaged. I think Steve asked them a question, what's the importance of trees? And one of them, Jean, you reminded me, said they give us oxygen. So I think they can teach us a few things. As you can see again, and this was J.W. Townsend who actually donated this tree and their labor. The president, Lee Townsend, was actually there digging the hole and helping along. So that's Lee on the left there in his bunch. So it was a very successful event. So I think that's my announcements. And Jeff Ayton's going to talk about the Arbor Day that was actually on Arbor Day last Friday, the 29th, that was done with the Tree Commission and the tree stewards.
Thank you, Peggy. It's wonderful to see those pictures of Clark. I'm sorry to have missed that.
Oh, you missed it. That's right.
Yeah. The event on the 29th, which was the Friday before that tree planting, was at Sojourners Church, and there was a dedication of a very large caliper elm there that is just a fantastic tree. If you haven't been over there to see it, it is really amazing. And that event was captured with a picture on the front page of the Progress. I'm sure you probably all saw that with Sojourner Church members with their arms wrapped around the trunk of that tree. Cats was, of course, it was a cats event, but in lieu of Peggy being there to speak because she was out of town, I just said a couple things about the Tree Commission and the Arbor Day coming up. Vicki was there, Jean was there, Steve was there. I'm not sure who else that I might be missing, but a fair number of cats members too. So it was a good event. Held up Mark was there, of course. Yep. And then Steve and the forester for the, I guess, U.S. Forest Service. I'm forgetting who he exactly represents, Steve, but held up a sign for Tree City, USA.
Department of Forestry.
Department of Forestry.
Yep. Virginia Department.
And we spoke a little bit about what it takes to be a Tree City, USA, and that involves having a tree commission. So glad we're doing that. That's it, I think, in terms of Arbor Day stuff.
Thank you. And I meant to say about the tree planted at Clark, the Arbor Day committee, the Arbor Committee of our tree commission had decided that they wanted to plant a tree besides during the celebration with cats. We wanted to do it on Arbor Day, but Clark, all these elementary schools have special days when children can come out, and Clark's was on a Monday. So we had to do it after Arbor Day, but I think it's a nice tradition for us to do besides just, celebrating. So I think it would be something nice to carry on. I was, it was so nice of J.W. Townsend's group to plant it. And it happened to be, it was going to be a tulip poplar, but the tulip poplar they were going to bring had a scar on it. And Lee Townsend was afraid that Steve and I would have complained if we saw the scar, even though the tree would have been fine. So at the last minute, he got a willow oak, which was probably much bigger than the tulip poplar. So it's a beautiful tree, and I think it's a great tradition.
Yeah, it looked like a wonderful tree. And it's set up now so that we could plant 2 more, right? Steve and I had looked at locations aligned with that front portico and then the Zelkovas that line the street. And then we could put 2 more in potentially either this fall, Steve, or maybe it's an event next year.
Yeah, we were, I think, as we looked at the Venable playground, I think you remember that Relief we put a day in September, we measured the temperature, talking about heat temperature on the 2 playgrounds. One is covered with trees, the other has no canopy shade. The difference in the temperature was 20 degrees difference, 82 to 102 degrees on that one site on a hot day in September. And it made us really realize that our priorities need to be looking at places where people, particularly kids and older people, as Susan said, who are affected by the heat. We need to kind of assess our playgrounds, our parks, and see where we can reduce the heat for children. Steve and I began to talk about priorities. And I think also one of the things we need to talk about is sort of trying to concentrate our trees in, you know, in locations instead of spreading them out. I mean, right now it's 166 trees, as Steve's having a look at, that are all over the city. And one way to make maintenance better is to try to concentrate them on, you know, a fewer locations. I'm sure Rian would agree with that too. So that's something I think we want to be looking at as we look at our priorities. But anyway, we had those 3 great events, and we got a lot of publicity for them. In fact, the school site is going to put this Clark planting on their site. They told me to. So anyway, Vicki, I don't want to steal your thunder. You probably don't have anything so exciting to talk about, but I think you were going to summarize a little bit for us, because Rian and Steve couldn't be at the last meeting. We had a great time talking with James and Stanley, and I've forgotten the name of the woman in public utilities. But anyway, we had a good discussion.
Okay, well, after our last meeting, the committee finalized our initial recommendations to the Charlottesville Plans Together process for the rezoning ordinance. And of course, it was mainly about protecting trees during the during development, focusing on site preparation, applications, approval, and enforcement during construction and consequences. I don't know if Rian and Steve have seen that. Our recommendations, Peggy sent them to James Freeze and Seville Plans Together in the middle of April. Have you seen those? Rian?
Yes.
You,
Yes, I have.
but you have it. Okay, Steve.
I'll send them to you, Steve.
Yeah. Okay. And we haven't heard any, we haven't gotten any feedback yet, and we haven't heard anything about next steps for the Seville Plans Together process. At our last meeting, when James Freeze was with us, one of the interesting things that he said, we raised the issue that we need to have somebody in city government who's paying attention to site plans and how they're affecting trees. And James said that the site plan applications are circulated to the city arborist, among other people, and it's up to the arborist to raise any issues about things that aren't in accord with the code or with best management practices. Now that has not been being done on a regular basis in the past, and I don't know if it was part of your job description, Steve, to review all the site plans, but that seems to be what's expected of you. Do you think you can manage that, or should we like other recommendations?
I will get through as many as I can.
We can't hear you, Steve.
Sorry, I'll get through as many site plans as I can. It's a new responsibility for me, but happy to do as many as I can. Yeah.
Okay.
We
And
are.
of course, we as the tree commission have also volunteered to be involved in that. But
Rian,
Yeah,
did
we're
you-
working. Yeah, we're just working together, myself and Steve. Working through site plans, looking at our ordinance, making sure that everything is according to plan. So we're doing it together.
thank you. Okay. That's all for me.
Okay. Does anybody else have any items they'd like to discuss tonight? Jean?
Yeah, Vicki, I was wondering, what are we doing to advocate for the changes that we want? I mean, is it just enough to submit them? Or do we back it up with trying to get the public expressing support?
I think we will be asking for support. Also, Tim is our representative to Seville Plans Together. And so he'll be involved at that end. That's how it's done. And then there will be public input in the process of coming up with the approach plan. And I think we'll be advocating during that process and encouraging other people as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I was wondering, do we have a timeline for that?
No.
Tim,
So the Seville Plans Together right now is working with the city staff and the city attorney to identify issues that need to be addressed in the ordinance that's being rewritten. They're creating a list of all the things that have been wrong or are wrong in the ordinance that need correction, and then aspirations from the comprehensive plan that's been adopted. And they're creating this kind of planning document, and it is supposed to be coming out within the next couple of weeks, sometime by the end of May. So that will be coming out first. I think that will be our first opportunity to make sure that they've captured the issues that we have brought up. So that'll be coming out to the public, and everyone will have the opportunity to review it, and we certainly shall. And then we'll make, and then there'll be public comment based upon that document.
Have we
Before
made,
before that document is put out, are Steve or Tim involved at all in the preparation of it?
Well,
Or are
I'm
we just
not.
going to wait till the end of May?
I don't know about Steve, but I'm not, and Tim, I suspect, is not either. We're just waiting for everyone to get this document. It's something that the Seville Plans Together is pulling together right now, and then there'll be the opportunity to review it and comment on it.
have we published online the code report?
No, that's one of the things that we've talked about, that Mark Rylander Mark Rylander talked about working with Steve about getting some of the things posted on our website. And I think that's Jean, that's a good idea. I'll put it on the list, because we
So-
talked about right now, we don't have links to some of our, it's not Steve's fault or anybody's fault. He's just been here a short time. But
Right.
we'll get some of those links. So that's a good idea to put that one up there.
And we're not at liberty to share that document with anyone at this point. Is that correct?
No.
I had a lot of people ask me what we're doing, and when I tell them how excited I am about what the code committee is doing, they all want to see the report.
No, you
But I-
can share it.
Oh, I can share that?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's been talked about it. It's been given to James France. He
Yep.
sent it to Seville, not Seville Weekly, Seville Plans Together. Yes, please share it. But that's a
yep.
good idea. We'll link that.
Paper your living room with it. Hand it out on the street corners. Do everything you can with it. Yes.
Well,
Let's
the one-
develop support.
The version I have says draft on it.
Oh.
And I'm not sure if there's a date on it.
Okay,
I'm not sure I have the one that you'd want me to share.
okay.
The final is dated April 13th, and it has a cover letter that Tim wrote. Can you send that out to everybody, Peggy?
I will.
One that you sent to James?
Yeah, I'm sorry. Probably, that's right. It was probably, we probably got the draft at the last meeting. And I sent the final to James. So I will send that.
Yeah, Peggy sent it on April 14th, so we do have a copy of it. It's a PDF version.
Did I send it to everybody?
Yeah.
But I'll send it again.
Yeah.
Thank
Get that
you.
circulated. Yeah, and just to flesh out the structure or the process that Jody described a little bit further. Yeah, you're absolutely right. It seems like it should be time to hear back from Seville Plans Together consultants and NDS staff. I think the timeline just generally said spring 2022. But as far as what the next steps are, it's that report that you talked about, Jody. It's the diagnostic report where they're evaluating what's working and what's not working. And then the what they're calling an approach report. So kind of drafting a process for how to do the zoning ordinance. But what they're going to be rolling out is not the draft zoning ordinance yet. It's more of the analysis and the process design for doing the draft zoning ordinance updates over the summer, and then and then coming back to the public in, I think, the fall, and trying to finalize the zoning ordinance amendments through the winter and finish up in March of 2023. So I just wanted to put that kind of structure, that broader process, so that people aren't expecting a draft zoning ordinance in a few weeks.
Okay.
But
Well,
no, and I was gonna say, I'm not involved in the content production on that, and that's been true of each of the 3 phases of Seville Plans Together. It's really the consultants who are doing that with staff, and then they're engaging the steering committee members, you know, and talking through their process and the content before it goes more broadly to the public. But we're not developing the content or developing the recommendations beyond what we've done as a committee and as a commission to send that report to them while they do their diagnostics and their approaches.
thank you. Well, I'll send both out, the letter and the document again. So we
And
can have,
again-
and thank you, Gene. I think it's a good idea to
Yeah.
link it. And so Mark Rylander and I'll talk about that.
And if I can interject, you know, this is driven by the NDS department, and Tim is 100% correct, whereby at the end they'll be working with staff. So this will land on Steve's desk as well, to do some wordsmiths and stuff of that nature. We will definitely, you know, bring that draft, you know, to Peggy or to the committee, just for your eyes and ears, just to make sure what the issues that we presented in the beginning is interpreted into an ordinance.
Okay, thank you. So with that, action items for next meeting, I've got a bunch of little things to send you and just catch up on, but I would like 2 things. Jean and Donna brought to my attention, they were at a, I won't point fingers at anybody, but particularly not at Jean and Donna. No, they were at a meeting recently where a proposal, I'm sorry, Mark, did you have anything that you wanted to say before I can't hear you.
Now it seems like I'm interrupting you. I'm sorry. I just, you had asked, I was trying to figure out how to raise my hand. You'd ask about other questions. And one of the things that I would like to try to do, particularly for new members, when we cover a topic, is to kind of leave behind some level of documentation so that a year from now or 2 years or 3 years from now, everybody remembers sort of what a protocol is. And because I got in a conversation yesterday at a neighborhood picnic about Charlottesville's tree planting, I found myself unable to talk about what the city does to water it. You know, Steve, you'd mentioned that that you were thinking of trying to get next year's plantings closer together, because we've heard in the past about how Parks and Rec water trucks are driving to the city limits, you know, one end of the city to another to add some water to trees. And I wanted to actually understand, one, what homeowners are given, just like, so the tree commission should know when a homeowner gets a tree, what we tell them. And 2, sort of whether, you know, to understand sort of what the city, when the city is providing this watering, and if that's really the solution. Because I've been doing other tree plantings recently and finding that, like, the water bags are not necessarily the best way to water a tree. So I've been also wondering whether we are convinced that our current process is the best for the trees. Those are a lot of questions, but I'd like to, basically all I'm saying is I would like a document explaining what the specs are for new city trees, what the homeowners see and what the city actually does, because I don't have that.
Mark, just if I could interject before Steve, the city doesn't plant on any private property.
No, I know.
Yeah, I'll let Steve talk about the public trees, but the trees that Relief is helping Katz plant at 10th and Page. In fact, Katz has planted 29 trees. so far. So that's really great. They get a leave behind. In fact, we're revising it about how to maintain the trees. And then CATS actually follows and sort of looks and makes sure that people are taking care of the trees for a year or two. So that's what happens on private property, but Steve can talk about the public trees.
Sure. So I actually just looked at the scope of the work that was done, kind of the written contract. So all the trees that were planted, they did have pretty much a 20-gallon gator bag, which releases the water slowly. Those are long empty and need to be refilled. I'll get back to that in a second. But also what did come with this big planting, I think it's 162 trees. Beyond, stop me if I'm not correct here. But there was also a guarantee associated with that. Those trees would be living for a year. It's up to us to water them, but there is still a guarantee in effect that if those trees do die, they will replace them. So at some point, probably towards the end of the summer, I'm going to do an inventory of all 162 trees and make a list of what's survived and what hasn't. But so going back to the gator bag and the watering, we in Parks and Rec do not have the staff to maintain the level of watering that we need. We just don't have it. So to some degree, some of those trees just are not going to get watered probably as much as they should. I was talking with Robin Haynes, and CATS is prepared to donate at least some time to helping to water. And I don't know about Tree Commission, but we need to kind of find a mechanism to prepare for that. So whether it's access to a trailer and a water tank and a pump, so that you guys can actually, with help and with training, drive to some of these trees and water them. That's one option. Another option might be just to not water them and see kind of what kind of mortality we get, and then next year not plant as many or plant them more targeted to specific areas so they're easier to maintain. I'm still kind of wondering how we really can be expected to maintain 162 trees all over the city with very limited staff.
Yeah. So
go ahead, Rian.
Yeah, just to piggyback off Steve, and we just had a meeting this afternoon. I'm talking about the same topic, and it is, instead of looking at the small term solutions, we are looking at a long-term solution. I don't have the solution. We'd love to hear some input. For example, we planted 162 trees now. Prior years, we planted X amount of trees. We are planning on planting another 200 trees or more. The question is, how do we sustain ourselves in order to keep watering all those plants if we are, this is our third year in Parks and Rec that we do not have any staff. I'm still moved from 8 full-time positions empty to roughly around about 5 full-time staff now. But we just need to look at different solutions. As I informed Steve in one of our meetings, can we do a data analysis? One season, we just don't water at all, and see how many trees do we lose. Because in the past, talking to past staff, especially our whole team, we had an individual that's what he did, was water all the plants in the city from April every single day, all the way through till October. And we still lose roughly around about 10% of the trees. So these are just thoughts, recommendations. If you guys have any recommendations of how to find a great solution, that would be great, because we can also, in our next tree planting, we can also put that into the contract, just to say, you shall water these plants for a year. But with that being said, we won't get 200 trees because we only have 75. I mean, now we have 100,000. So we have to do the cost analysis benefits here is, okay, do you want to try to see if we can save X amount of trees so that do we add it into the contract that the contractor shall be responsible for watering the tree for a year and also replacing dead trees. Maybe that's a solution, but that's something that we really need to consider as a tree commission, is to just figure out and try to get some ideas.
Yeah. Thank you, Rian. I think, Steve and I began to talk about that a little bit. I think, trying to concentrate the trees in fewer locations, that's one thing. Like you said, maybe we have to hire with that money, because we want the trees to survive. And if we can't plant 200, maybe we have to use some of that money to have a contractor plant them. Relying on volunteers, I think, is a little iffy. We are trying to experiment, as Steve knows, at Clark. We're putting what's called a tree diaper on the tree. And actually, Steve, I've ordered a little bit bigger one because I didn't know that tree was going to be so big. So instead of a 3-foot one, we're going to have a 48-inch donut, basically. And these donuts actually have little pellets in them, and they absorb the water and then let it out very slowly. And when it rains, they also absorb the water. And these go under the mulch. So they're not they look better than the gator bags because you don't even see them there. There's no chance that kids can pull them off or anything. So I think that'll be interesting, Steve. They're more expensive than the gator bags, but they cut down on watering. Unless there's a severe drought, if they're 3 to 4 weeks without 1 inch of rain, then you have to water them. But it cuts down on the water, Rian. So this is an experiment to see how this tree does. And they're used in parks all over. They're made in Richmond. They're used in parks and colleges. In fact, our tree company uses them down at Hollywood Cemetery, where they plant about 120 trees a year and have had great success and cut down on maintenance. So anyway, there are lots of alternatives. I think we'll have to talk about that. Do I have something in the chat here? No. Okay, sorry. Thank you. Just to get, I think with that, I'll get back to, so what I was saying, 2 issues. Donna and Jean brought to my attention. They were at a large meeting, and I may put words in your mouth, Donna and Jean, trying to convince a group the importance of trees and shade in the city and heat. And it didn't get, the resolution didn't get passed. So we've come to the conclusion that we need to educate adults, as Jean is always talking about, as much as we do children. In fact, children might, as evidence from Clark, I think they might know more about trees than this group of adults and how important they are. But anyway, so we thought, Jean had suggested, we thought it was a couple things she had suggested. One, to invite Tim, what's his name? Beatley.
Beatley.
Jeff, okay,
Beatley.
who is at UVA, right close to us, and he has an organization that's called Biophilic Cities, I think. It's talking about how important green spaces, trees, nature are in cities, and he's doing it all over the country. He may be doing it all over the world. So we thought that would be important. And Jean came up with an interesting title if we wanted to have a seminar called, Jean, I may not say the words correctly, but green spaces, affordable housing, and social equity. Charlottesville have it all? I think Tim would probably say yes, so we need to find out. So Jeff is going to try to invite him either to our next meeting or July. He has a great presentation, beautiful pictures, and it's something that's, as I said, that he has cities that he's working with all over the world. Why not Charlottesville? And the other issue that came up tonight, I think, is on Fifth Street. I think we should make a statement or write a memo to Planning Commission and City before or at this May meeting. And I'll ask Jody what it is about Fifth Street. I think enough of you all presented your comments. So I thought I would draft a letter, and then Jeff and I will look at it and circulate it among all of you and see if it makes sense that the city pay attention to these trees and not just throw them out willy-nilly. So that's something I think we ought to, that's very important. And Jody, I'll get with you to see when that's going to come up.
It's next Tuesday.
Thought he said the 24th.
Oh, well, is there a work session? I know the next planning commission meeting is next Tuesday.
Yeah, I think he said there was a work session on the 23rd or 24th. Must be the 23rd.
Must be. Yes, that's right. There is something later in the month. Okay, I'm sorry. It'll be the 4th Tuesday in the month.
Good. That's the 23rd. Thank you.
Okay.
All right. That gives
That's
us
all right.
that gives us time. So if there's anything else, not anything else, we can adjourn. Oh, sorry, Lakeisha or Jeff.
Real quick on the watering issue. Just a thought, but would there be some species on our approved list, like more evergreens or some other deciduous species that would be more, I guess, drought tolerant or have less water requirements? Maybe start planning on planting those types of trees to potentially reduce the amount of watering that's necessary, or at least give a shot for increased survival.
Consideration, yes.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. I think it's something to put on the Arbor Committee list because they're going to be talking about the priorities for planting. And so I think that's something the Arbor Committee could talk with Steve about, this whole issue. How can we, as I told Steve, we want to spend the money because we don't want city council to take it away from us, the $100,000, but how can we spend it wisely, cut down on maintenance? And so I think that's something we'll charge the Codes Committee to look into. Thank you for bringing that up. Lakeisha?
Hi, everyone. Good evening. I wanted to make a comment just about a sign that I saw recently in town over by the Crescent Hall apartments. I noticed a lot that there are people in a lot of our communities talking about trees all the time. And I've been thinking about sort of the distinction between the kinds of education that we might be doing to folks who don't know, and then the kind of listening that we may be doing or missing from people who are like putting up signs or finding other ways to literally say what's happening around them. But I just wonder about some way of trying to get a sense of where people in some of the more vulnerable neighborhoods are at, because I feel like I keep hearing a totally different conversation in those spaces than I hear in our spaces and also at UVA. So I thought I would just share this sign that is underneath a canopy over in Crescent Hall. It starts, "Please let us keep our trees." And then says, "Crescent Hall residents sit beneath their shade in the summer. These trees help the heat baking off the parking lot's concrete and asphalt not be as miserable. They block the very bright parking lot lights from the neighboring houses. They buffer some of the very strong winds that come through. Let us keep what the upper class neighborhoods already have. We love these trees. We use these trees. We want these trees, please." And I'm just noticing that, like, these are public signs and they're there. And I'm just curious about thinking through a different kind of relationship to how we're talking about some of the education pieces, but I'm also not on the advocacy committee. So yeah, just floating that there are things that I continue to hear in my very new place here, and it feels like there is something that people are trying to talk about as it also is getting hotter and warmer, and things are already happening, and how to think about what we have to learn from people who are hot.
That's great. You brought I'm going to go take a picture of that sign.
I'll send you the picture. I have
Oh,
it.
good, good. And that's interesting you brought it up because one of the developers or funders of the redevelopment of Crescent Hall has invited me to come talk to them about trees and the importance of trees and how they can talk to their residents. And so that's great. I'd love, that's going to be great. I'm going to show them that. And this is a funder, a developer of a lot of the public housing, and they're concerned about the trees. And we also heard through one of the articles in Seville Tomorrow, if you listen to a couple of those radio shows, I can't remember the name of it, but the actually assistant clerk for council, whose name I can't remember, maybe Rion, you know her. Is it Max? Oh, I can't remember her name.
Max Cecilia.
Do you know her?
Yeah, Max Cecilia, who I think is the co-host of In My Humble Opinion.
Right, right. But she mentioned, she talked about Friendship Court and that her feeling was the residents there probably didn't even know the trees were going to come down or realize how important they were to their health and saving energy. And so I thought that was really interesting because she had heard our presentation to City Council. And in fact, they did reach out to me, and I guess I get back to them about coming and talking to the, on that show. So maybe if they reach out again, Makesha, maybe you and I can do it.
Yeah, and I'm actually going to a town hall with In My Humble Opinion this Thursday. And maybe I'll just, connect and just get a sense of what kind of interest there is.
Yeah, because they did reach out to me and I said I'd be glad to do it. And that brings up too, at 10th and Page, we're trying to be very careful and making sure people, we're working really closely with James Bryant, who's on the school board and has lived in 10th and Page his whole life. And I also thought he'd be a great one to have on that show too, Makesha, because, we're targeting that neighborhood and he knows, he knows the history, he's been there. And he's now convinced that he's planted 2 trees in his yard. And he said, no wonder my air conditioning is so high. I don't have any trees. So anyway, I think that's, it's interesting. So I'm glad you brought that up. And we do need more education. As I said, I think these children at Clark and the kids at Venable, when we presented to them, they knew all the answers to all the questions about trees. So we may need to educate adults more than we do children. So thank you. So with that, is there anybody else that has anything?
I just have a quick comment. I don't know if it's relevant here, but we did collect a number of tree saplings today from Public Works and Utility. I understand that went through you, Peggy?
Yeah, I did send that out, your email about all those free trees. I did send them out.
Okay, I didn't know exactly how it landed with Rion and I, or how the utility was directed, but anyway, I do have several. I'm gonna pretty much keep the avenue open for tree commission or other people on the email to get some, but I can't imagine they're gonna take very many. I don't have time to plant them.
Yeah.
If it's okay with you, I will probably turn most of them over to Devin Floyd.
I'm sorry, couldn't hear you.
I can't get rid of all of them and I don't expect to. I'll probably give most of them to Devin Floyd, who's got a number of projects with schools and other nonprofits that he can either use the plantings in his own installations or we can get rid of them pretty quickly. But I'm not exactly sure what the kind of what strings were attached with utility. I was under the impression that I was just supposed to kind of get them in the ground as soon as I can. But I didn't know if you had any other information about that.
I forwarded your email to all the tree commission members, I think this afternoon, and I forwarded to other people. So
okay,
you might be, and I told them they could just come and pick them up. They don't have to contact you. A couple other people had emailed me about trees, so I sent it to them too.
All right, well, kind of whatever. I'll probably give them to the end of the week, and if I have any left, I'll just turn them over to Central Urban Habitats. They'll
Yeah.
plant
Because
them.
yeah, they've been in containers. They need to get into the ground. It's
Yes.
getting too hot. They can't sit outside. So if you know anybody that wants a tree, just pass that on, because you can just go pick it up. You don't have to ask anybody.
Right, during business hours at the Penn
During
Park.
business hours.
Yeah, yeah.
So thanks for reminding us about that, Steve. And
Okay.
Jean?
Yeah, I met with some of my neighbors, real adjacent neighbors here. I'm at the corner of Garrett and Second. And it's really a tree desert between here and Water Street. That is when we walk down, there's these 2-3 blocks, just nothing. You pass where the farmer's market is. And but they asked me, they said, well, what can we do as a neighborhood to put some pressure on to get street trees on those streets? And I really didn't have an answer for them, but I said I'd find out. Does the public really know if they want to advocate for their neighborhood for street trees? What is the process?
Well,
I don't know, I'm addressing that too.
yeah, I don't think we've had a formal process. Before, when we worked with Mike, the tree commission would put in suggestions, for planting. We didn't go out to the public. I think we got to be careful, though, again, about planting all over the city. It's just way too much maintenance, and we're going to lose too many trees, as Steve was saying. But certainly, suggestions from you, and I think we always consider them. But I think we got to be careful, that, again, we don't end up with trees everywhere.
But it needs to be fair. I mean, where I'm speaking of is definitely a tree desert.
Yeah.
I mean, we have lots of trees on these other streets, but that is a fairly large tree desert. And it's on the heat maps, it's one of the hottest areas. But, it needs to be fair, because when we were over at Sojourners, a couple people said to me, well, the reason that our neighborhood gets so many trees is because we advocate for them. And they're sort of savvy about how to get the trees and how to put the suggestions in. My neighborhood is not savvy about that. And I don't know, if we're going to be fair neighborhood by neighborhood, we need to have a process which everyone knows how to do. And, you apply and if you can get a lot of signatures on a petition for trees in certain streets, or that they should be considered and have a fair chance, knowing that there's limited number of trees that can be chosen. So I just think in the notion of fairness, as it gets hotter, I think people in the city are going to start demanding more trees, because we are educating them, and they're being educated in other ways, that it's a matter of their safety and their health. And they're going to start demanding them, and we need to have a fair process by which they can demand them.
Well, we set up a priority list, and one of them is on, in areas where there are not a lot of trees, along sidewalks and trails. I can't remember all the priorities now, and that's something the Arbor Committee will look at again. But we do have sort of a criteria of where we want, where we think trees need to be planted. So if there's streets, that don't have trees, particularly, not just spotted, but long streets or whatever. Certainly that's going to be taken into consideration. So I think, when the time comes, you certainly can voice your opinion, or a neighborhood could voice their opinion.
So to whom would a petition go? To you?
Well, I think
someone in the city.
Yeah, let's let the Arbor Committee think through that, because we haven't opened up to the public, but we have tried to look at areas that need trees and to make it fair. And
right. Yeah, I think just from the public's point of view, and even from my point of view, I know what the requirements we have. We talked about them my first year on the commission, but there are so many things you don't know, like what's under the ground, and what do the property owners have to say, even though it's right of way. and how wide is the right of way. Most of us as citizens have no idea about that stuff. So people will get discouraged if they start saying, well, this is a tree desert and it's hot as hell here. And and they keep saying we can't plant trees there because they won't understand why. And then it'll generate hostility.
Yeah. Well, I think it's something, again, we'll get the Arbor Committee working closely with Steve and come up with a better process this year. That's something that's high on the list for the Arbor Committee. So appreciate that.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think also, important to keep that canopy tree study in mind and the science behind that, and use that really as a baseline or a basis. And then, yes, to advocacy, but also knowing that advocacy often happens in privileged places where people do have time and resources to make documents that advocate for their spaces. So to also make sure that tree planting is happening in those places where the tree study has said it needs to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
I wonder, one other piece of food for thought is that if the issue is watering, can a neighborhood commit to adopting a tree and then making sure it's watered?
Yeah, that's a possibility too.
I don't see why not.
Yeah, I love that idea.
Yeah.
City puts it in the ground, and then the neighborhood is responsible for it. Yeah.
Or businesses can adopt highways, or not-for-profits can adopt them.
Yeah.
Trees.
I think those are all good ideas. So, but we're running out of time. So I'm sure everybody's hungry. So I think we'll close the meeting down, but thank you for coming. And see you, if not before, you'll be hearing from us anyway, one way or the other, but before June. Thank
Do
you.
we have to ask for public comment if there's anybody?
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Is there anybody there? I forgot. I didn't look.
We have one hand raised.
All right.
Jeff Werner.
Jeff?
On with the commission. Can you hear us?
I guess I can. I think so. Hey, everyone. And Stephen, I'm typing furiously a note here to introduce myself to you. I'm the preservation and design planner. So we have a lot of overlap to catch up on. But I just wanted to just give a little context on the site plan question. Is that when something comes in, it either goes to the BAR or goes to the Entrance Corridor Review Board, I review those site plans. So I'll do the check for, is it consistent with the master tree list in the shrub list? So I've been doing the check off on that. But I raised the question recently, well, when one of these projects when it doesn't come my way, who's looking at the trees? So Stephen, that's where I think where that conversation came up with looking at site plans. But it's something I can coordinate with you and work with you and sort of make sure we're on the same page on that. And we also, as Jody's on the BAR, at least for a little while longer, we deal a lot with the trees on the downtown mall. So we definitely have some conversations to have about that. So I know I'm not showing up on the screen, but I just want to introduce myself and just offer you all that context on that, what's going on with the site plan review and looking at the trees and who's the Lorax when it comes to the master tree list. So that's all. Thank you for letting me interrupt.
All right. Thank you. He did bring up the master tree list, which we revised, Steve, like a year ago, and still hasn't been sent to the planning commission, but it's probably just as well because it's probably go to the codes committee to let you have a chance to look at it and then bring it back to the tree commission again. But anyway, there are all these things that are left hanging that we need to talk to you about. We'll try to prioritize them though. All right. Thank you, Jeff. Goodbye. Okay.
Thank you all. Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Nice to meet everybody.
Yeah.
See you.